After almost 20 years, things got loud when the divorce papers came out. It wasn't a scandal, but more like a confirmation of what was really going on. It wasn't about getting back at anyone or cleaning up a mess. The media wanted to know what happened, and all Nicole said was that she finally remembered who she was before all the fame. She sounded calm, like always, but there was something new about her. A peacefulness you get after a fire, a freedom that money can't buy. The headlines screamed about cheating, sadness, and big reveals, but what she showed wasn't just gossip. It was real life and memories, the story of how a woman made of pure starlight could still get lost in love. Now, she's moving forward, not to point fingers, but to tell her story, not to destroy, but to create. The real question isn't what Keith Urban did, but what Nicole Kidman went through before the cameras, before the red carpets, before the quiet fights of marriage and fame. There was a little kid running barefoot near the hot edges of Sydney. Her name was Nicole Mary Kidman. Her hair was wildly red, and her skin was so pale that the sun seemed to chase her just to leave a mark. Her dad, Anthony, was a psychologist, gentle, thoughtful, always trying to understand the hidden struggles in people's minds. Her mom, Janelle, was a nurse and women's rights activist, a woman who was both caring and rebellious. From them, Nicole learned two important lessons. Kindness can heal, but silence can kill you. She was shy, awkward, and really tall for her age. Other kids teased her about her height, her accent, and the way she nervously twisted her fingers when she talked, but even then there was something unbreakable about her, a strange strength that seemed to shine from behind her quiet eyes. She didn't fire back with words. She waited for her chance. When she saw how it felt to perform, it was like her first breath. The local theater smelled like dust and dreams. Standing under its cheap lights, something clicked inside her. She could lose herself in someone else's pain or joy. That's how she learned to deal with her problems. Her dad once told her that people think being strong means never breaking. But being strong is about learning to put yourself back together. She held on to those words like a prayer through every tough time. Even as a kid, she was a weird mix. Sensitive but tough, thoughtful but ready to see the world. She read a lot, filled journals with notes, and practiced lines in front of a mirror. She wasn't being vain, just serious. She didn't dream of being famous. She dreamed of changing, of becoming someone real who could reach others through art. When she was 17 and everyone else stressed about exams, Nicole auditioned for Bush Christmas. It wasn't a big deal, but it felt like her destiny. Her face, which was strangely beautiful, grabbed the attention of filmmakers from other countries. But they didn't see what she really wanted. She needed to show that the shy kid from Sydney could say something important enough to be heard everywhere. Fame didn't tempt her. What she wanted was to escape her self-doubt, from feeling alone, and from the mean remarks that made her feel not good enough. Acting gave her a way to express herself, but hurt her too. She spent years giving everything to her characters. She forgot how to save some for herself. When she was barely 20, someone asked Nicole what she feared most. She smiled, a bit shy but confident, and said it was the idea of fading away, of being overshadowed by someone else's story. This fear would follow her through good times and bad, into relationships that promised forever but only lasted for a while. It would whisper to her on nights when applause felt hollow, when the person everyone saw wasn't who she knew herself to be. Back then, Nicole still believed in being good. She thought love was a safe place, not just a mirror. She believed being kind would protect you. But the world she was stepping into, shiny, ruthless, and exciting, didn't care much for gentle souls. At 21, Hollywood called. She packed her bags and flew alone. As the plane took off, she watched her youth disappear below the clouds. She didn't know it then, but that flight wasn't just a beginning. It was a goodbye not just to Australia, but to innocence. The girl who left Sydney would never be seen again. The woman who arrived in Los Angeles would learn what it meant to shine and burn. Los Angeles didn't welcome her with open arms. Instead, she entered rooms that judged beauty like money and confidence like air. Nicole had one, but not always the other. The city wanted certainty, and she gave her best shot. Casting directors looked at her photos like they were flipping through a magazine they didn't plan to buy. Still, she hung in there with the grit she'd learned in school plays. If you can't force your way in, then become the one who opens the door for others. She didn't burst onto the scene with a lot of fuss, but more like a change in the weather. What started as a small thing completely shifted everything. On that boat in the ocean, she realized the camera loved her stillness, and she gave it what it wanted. Fear showed on her face in a subtle, exact way. Her resolve was like a small candle that wouldn't burn out. People didn't just watch her, they were drawn to her, like she was a quiet mystery. The movie business started to wonder about her limits. Could she be fragile? Yes. Could she be dangerous? Also yes. But what really shocked them was how she could be both at the same time. She moved through different roles like an actor moves through rooms, never tripping. From suspense to love, respect to scandal. Each part was like a step on a secret staircase she climbed without looking down. Then came the kind of love that changes everything. Meeting Tom Cruise was like walking into a storm of attention. Cameras, headlines, expectations. Intense and classy love got mixed up with career strategy, without her even trying. Together, they were movie magic. Paths coming together, light bending. She learned how to handle being famous with someone else, how to smile when flashes were blinding, how to disappear into someone else's fame without losing your place on set the next day. Being with him taught her about contradictions. Being stable can feel like a fake background, strong until someone pushes too hard. Intimacy can be like a magnifying glass that also burns. She kept working because it kept her real. On set, she could give her feelings different names and deal with them. Away from set, life was a stricter script with fewer do-overs. Working more made her super sharp, but not in a bad way. Critics who used to think she was just pretty started seeing her as a real actress. Moulin Rouge showed how amazingly talented she was with no apologies. Her voice sounded like she was making deals with fate, and she loved like someone who knew time always catches up with you. Then came other roles. A spooky house where the ghosts weren't just in the walls, but in people's ability to be mean. Each role added strength and skill, until the old fear of becoming invisible didn't seem so bad. She stayed young, but the biz made her grow up fast. She became more careful, smarter about things, and learned the necessary secrets to stay herself. Then she got the role that would change everything, Virginia Woolf in The Hours. It wasn't about the clothes or accent. It was about getting into a mind where beauty and despair are always together, like rain and the ocean. Yeah, she wore that fake nose, but what she really nailed was being worn out. A deep tiredness that wasn't weakness but felt totally real. The award she won felt less like a crown and more like a mirror finally showing the truth. Winning big changed her isolation. People thought seeing her everywhere meant they knew her. They knew how she walked, what she wore, what she said, but fewer noticed the little things that kept her together. Her early morning drink, her books, how she'd read a script out loud to see where it went wrong. She learned to protect the small places inside herself where the world couldn't get to her. It wasn't hiding, it was surviving. Of course, there were mistakes along the way. Some movies flopped, and some choices that seemed smart at the beginning of the week looked bad by Friday. The movie biz loves a good story arc, and they tried to give her one. Newbie to wife, to serious actor, to something else they could label and sell. But Nicole didn't want to be boxed in. Every time an opportunity came up, she looked it over carefully, and then used it to get ahead. People wondered what her deal was. Was she cool or in charge, distant or classy? She knew the answer. It was focus. It's what athletes, chefs, doctors, and musicians have, but they call it something else. She understood that the camera loves focus as much as a desert loves water. She gave it both. This climb wasn't just up, it changed her and showed her different kinds of courage. She learned to stand up for things before everyone else did, and then to disagree even when everyone agreed. She learned what public love and private sadness cost. She learned how to use style as a shield without shutting out kindness. When photographers shouted questions about her marriage, she answered with her work. When they shouted louder, she worked harder. That was her promise to herself. Let your skill be your argument and your silence be your brand. It wasn't about giving up things, it was just her way. Even with all the success, she still worried that the same talent that let her disappear into other people's lives might make her lose herself. She could get so lost in a role that she forgot who she really was. She found that fame just reflects back at you. It doesn't tell you who you are, just how many people are watching. Rising to the top took her away from what people expected and into a place very few can handle. From up there, things looked sparkly, but the colors were off. Advice came disguised as affection, and affection came with strings attached. She stayed away from the noise and kept moving forward. That shy girl from Sydney was still there. She'd just become a machine. By the time Hollywood decided she was one of them, she was already planning her next move. Spaces for risk, for filmmakers who needed her support to express their doubts, for stories that needed her to bleed without leaving obvious scars. She survived the initial hype, the intense love, and the public tearing down, then rebuilt herself, quieter, sharper, realer. So climbing wasn't just about getting to the top. It taught her how to handle the spotlight without letting it blind her. It prepared her for what came next, a time when success would mix with longing, when Nashville would weave its way into the movie world, and when songs and film would try to find harmony that could turn into either a celebration or a cry. She didn't know which it would be yet. She just knew she was ready to try. At first, it felt like a rebirth. After the long, quiet pain of her first marriage, Nicole Kidman found herself in the light again, not on a set, but under the Tennessee sky where the air smelled like guitars and freedom. Keith Urban showed up not like a storm, but like music on the wind, charming, broken, full of rhythm and danger. She met him in 2005 at a party for Aussies in Los Angeles, and there was something familiar about him. A fellow traveler, someone else who had gone through isolation disguised as a stop on the road. He looked at her in a way that was totally fresh, not like she was some actress or symbol, but just like she was a real person again. That kind of look can make even someone really guarded drop their defenses. A year later, she was walking with him in Sydney, holding his hand kind of shaky. People thought it was a perfect match, a real love story. The movie people called it Love Saving Them. Nashville called them the perfect pair. But they knew the truth. They were both running. Keith was running from his addictions, and Nicole was running from being bored out of her mind. They thought moving around would fix things. For a while, it seemed to work. They made a happy home, had 2 girls, Sunday and Faith, and the house was full of laughter. She took time off from movies to cook, garden, and just breathe. He sang her name in his songs. She called him her true love. It felt real as it can be when 2 hurt people try to heal together. But fame doesn't sleep, and neither did the ambition that drove them in the first place. Nicole needed scripts and sets. Keith needed stages and spotlights. They loved each other from far away, whispered sweet things through bad phone lines, and shared little moments between gigs. She even said once that they were like 2 nomads chasing different stars. She smiled when she said it, but her eyes told a different story. A woman trying to balance being a mom, being creative, and the quiet fear that love could fade when you're apart. Keith, sweet as he was, had his own demons. The road was his home, but also his enemy. Being famous made him feel even more alone, and the music, his old medicine, sometimes came with a side of poison. There were nights when Nicole was alone in their big Nashville house, the place way too big, and the clocks way too loud, wondering which version of their love was real, the one she saw on stage or the one she felt lying quietly next to her in bed. Even so, she had faith. It was her guiding light. She played her part in his performances, smiled for the cameras, and always looked composed. People thought they proved that love could survive fame. For Nicole, it was a promise she wouldn't let break. When she landed new roles in shows like Big Little Lies, Lion, and Being the Ricardos, he cheered her on from afar, sounding truly proud. When his albums topped the charts, she was in the crowd, tears hidden behind her applause. But under the surface, there was a feeling that success didn't fix loneliness. It just made it harder to admit. Fame became like another person in their relationship, attractive, demanding, and always present. Every smile had to be picture perfect. Any arguments had to be resolved before breakfast. Every wound needed to heal before the red carpet. It was survival through acting, a dance of pretending. Sometimes she'd lie awake next to him, remembering her dad's words. Strength is learning how to rebuild. But she was tired of rebuilding, tired of pretending that the beautiful ruins they had were still homes. Once, in an interview, she was asked how she kept her marriage strong. She paused and then quietly said, "Forgiveness, endless forgiveness." Forgiveness became her way of coping. She forgave the tours, the absences, the headlines. She even forgave herself for staying quiet, for believing that love alone could heal the pain of being mismatched. But there were signs, small cracks in the perfect image. A forgotten anniversary, a nervous smile in a photo, a poem that felt too real. Fame magnifies what you try to hide. Still, she kept going because leaving felt like failing again, and she had already faced one public heartbreak. She wouldn't let people laugh at her pain a second time. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, Their worlds slowed down. Being stuck together forced them to share space that had always been divided by distance. Without the constant travel, the silences became unbearable. Small disagreements turned into huge problems. Keith looked for music. Nicole looked for meaning. They no longer spoke the same language. He wrote songs about being saved. She read poems about freedom. And somewhere between the notes and the verses, they started to drift apart. But she wouldn't talk about it. She believed in honor, in protecting not just herself, but the man she had loved. She told friends, "You can love someone deeply and still know it's over." When the divorce papers showed up in 2025, everyone gasped, but not Nicole. She'd already dealt with it privately way before the documents arrived. The fame that used to define her was now something she didn't need to look at anymore. For the first time, she wasn't stressing about how she looked or what her title was. She just needed to breathe and finally step out of playing happy and into being okay with being alone. For almost 2 decades, she'd been part of a duo. Now she'd have to sing her own song again. As the last spotlights faded, she said, not to the media, not to him, but to herself. "I don't need everyone to get me. I just need to hear my own voice again." Every love story has a shadow, a quiet, unseen version that gets bigger as things get brighter. Nicole Kidman had been around long enough to know this, but she hoped the shadow would stay small. It didn't. It started with whispers, not the kind in gossip mags, but the ones inside your own head. Keith's life was always loud, filled with music, crowds, and excitement. But when the shows were over, the quiet inside him got too loud. He looked for comfort in the old buddies that had almost destroyed him before: addiction, exhaustion, and feeling lost. Nicole, who had spent her life fixing broken things, thought she could save him. She believed love could save anyone, but love isn't always the answer. Sometimes it's what keeps you stuck. Night after night, she waited for his calls. Sometimes they came, sometimes they didn't. The excuses started easy: rehearsals, delays, tiredness. Then they became defenses. "You don't get the pressure," he'd say, his voice worn out. She'd reply softly, "I get it more than you know." Really, they were speaking completely different languages, one of harmony, one of silence. There were talks, promises, tears that soaked pillows thousands of miles apart. Keith went to rehab more than once. Each time, Nicole stood by him in public, calm and steady, the picture of loyalty. But behind closed doors, the strain started to show. She had spent years being someone's peace, someone's rock, someone's balance, and in giving that much, she had lost her own. She had to grin through the worry, walk red carpets knowing he might not show up, give interviews about love while her heart was racing inside her chest. People saw commitment, she just felt tired. Friends saw the weariness in her eyes. They asked if she was okay. She'd say, "I'm just tired." But what she meant was, "I'm disappearing." The issue wasn't cheating, it was fading away, a slow, unseen loss of herself. There was one night she never spoke about much, the night that showed the quiet breaking point. She had flown to meet him on tour, hoping they could fix what stardom had broken. When she got there, he was distant, restless, lost behind a wall she couldn't climb. The songs that used to bring them together now filled the air like noise. She asked quietly, "Are you happy?" He didn't answer. He just looked at the floor, his guitar still humming from the song he hadn't finished. That silence said it all. She went to bed alone that night, staring at the ceiling, realizing that sometimes the worst kind of loneliness is lying next to someone you love. Days turned into months. They tried therapy, prayers, vacations that felt more like rehearsals for peace. There were small improvements followed by big setbacks, not always about substances, sometimes just feelings. He was fighting demons. She was fighting the feeling of becoming one. When their kids asked why Dad seemed sad, she told them gently, "Sometimes grown-ups need to find their spark again." She said it with a smile, but her voice cracked on spark. By the time the papers were filed, the decision wasn't made in anger. It was made with kindness for both of them. The world saw the headlines: Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban splitting after 19 years. People guessed, gossipers had a field day, fans were sad. But the truth was simpler, sadder, quieter. Their marriage hadn't blown up in a storm. It had faded in a mist. Nicole didn't expose him to shame. She exposed herself to heal. In her first statement after the split, she said, "There's no bad guy here, just two people who tried really hard to keep love alive." Yet there were nights she cried until dawn, not because of the end, but because she remembered how beautiful it used to be. She replayed their laughter, the smell of his guitar strings, the way he used to hum songs against her skin. Love doesn't die with the odd, it lasts like perfume on a scarf, haunting and gentle. The issue wasn't losing Keith Urban, it was realizing that Nicole had built a safe place for everyone but herself. For years, she had been a wife, a mother, an inspiration, a savior. But who had been Nicole? When she looked in the mirror, she saw a bunch of images. Actress, mom, philanthropist, global icon. And yet the quiet girl from Sydney gazed back, asking softly, "Do you remember me?" She did, finally. The day the divorce went public, she walked out of her Nashville house with no friends, no fashion shield, just sunglasses and a light dress that waved like a flag of surrender, not to defeat, but to truth. The photographers shouted questions. What happened? Did he cheat? Are you mad? She said nothing. The silence was her answer, and it was louder than any headline. Later, in a rare interview, she was asked if she believed in love after everything. She smiled that small, knowing smile the world has seen 1,000 times on screen and said, "Yes, I do. I just know now that love isn't supposed to save you. It's supposed to teach you." That's the sad and the victory, because in losing him, she found the one person she had been missing all along, herself. As she walked away from the remains of a 19-year story, she didn't look back, not because she was ungrateful, but because she had finally realized you can love someone deeply and still need to leave to stay alive. People expected a scandal. They always do when a woman leaves. They want a villain, but Nicole Kidman didn't give them one. She gave them quiet, then slowly she gave them truth. The truth wasn't explosive, it was healing. It cut cleanly without noise or drama. In her first talk after the divorce, she didn't say Keith's name in anger or blame. Instead, she said softly, "I stayed too long in silence. Sometimes love asks for your voice, not your sacrifice." That was all it took. The words spread like fire through the media, not because they were shocking, but because they were undeniably real. For years, Nicole had been the queen of control, every move planned, every answer polished. But now her words were unscripted, raw, almost shaky. It was as if she'd finally stepped out from behind a curtain she'd been holding up her whole life. She talked about womanhood, about tolerance turning mean, about the strength to play happy in front of a crowd that confuses calm for happiness. People think holding on is love, but sometimes it's fear. Fear of being unloved if you stop pretending. She didn't expose Keith. She exposed the lie, the one every woman who has ever loved too deeply will know. The lie that loyalty can fix what truth cannot. For the first time, she told everyone that during her marriage, she forgot how to hear herself think. You become a mirror, reflecting someone else's light until one day you realize you've disappeared from the glass. Her words landed like quiet thunder. They weren't aimed at one man. They were a complaint against a society that tells women to fold themselves smaller in the name of commitment. She painted how she learned to reclaim being alone, to make it sacred again. Mornings in Nashville turned into rituals of rediscovery. She'd walk barefoot through her yard, letting the dew soak her feet, whispering to the sky, "I'm still here." In her studio, she started writing every day, not as the actress, not the wife, but the girl from Sydney who used to know invisibility. She filled pages with pieces. Freedom tastes like breathing, not asking permission. Peace isn't quiet, it's clarity. Love doesn't always end, it sometimes changes. As she wrote, the pain eased. The woman who used to believe love must be earned started to believe that love must be real, even when real means goodbye. When a reporter pressed her for details, "Was there cheating?" she smiled sadly. Every has infidelities. Some are of the body, some are of the heart. It wasn't an accusation, it was acceptance dressed as insight. Keith Urban, for his part, released a song months later. A sad song of regret, longing, and gratitude. The lyrics were hidden, but listeners felt her in every verse. "You were the peace I couldn't keep, and I'm still learning how to breathe where you used to be." Nicole never commented on it. She didn't need to. Some stories are better left in the hearts that lived them. What she did talk about, though, was freedom, not the kind you buy in self-help books, the kind that feels like finally living without regret. She started making more movies, championing women's voices, creating room for stories that reflected her own coming back to life. Her performances got stronger, glowed differently, less like a show, more like real life. On set, she told a young actress, "You don't have to suffer to be great, you just have to be real." It was her new belief. When the headlines called her brave, she chuckled softly. Brave! No, I'm scared, but I go anyway. That's the secret. Bravery isn't not being afraid. It's refusing to be controlled by it. People wanted her to remarry, to chase youth, to rebuild herself for the world's wanting. But Nicole's change wasn't on the surface. It was deep, unseen, the kind that doesn't need anyone's okay. She stopped chasing perfect endings. She started chasing real beginnings. For the first time in her life, she lived without a crowd. And in that quiet, she found a deeper song, one that didn't need a stage, a partner, or applause. Years ago, she had said she knew how to become invisible. Now she said, invisibility can be beautiful when it means belonging to yourself. That quote went viral, but she didn't write it for attention. She wrote it for keeps. The film industry loves a comeback, but Nicole Kidman didn't come back. She came home, not to a house, not to a man, but to herself. When she finally looked in the mirror, the image no longer scared her. It wasn't the wife, the mother, the icon, or the rescuer gazing back. It was just Nicole, the woman who had walked through commitment and despair, through fame and loss, and come out whole. When asked what she would tell her younger self, she paused for a long time, then whispered, "You don't have to keep proving you're worthy of love. You already are." That's the truth she had been hiding, not from everyone, but from herself, and now it was free. She no longer stands in the glare of spotlights. She walks through it calm. The air around her feels different now, clearer, brighter, more alive. No longer a woman doing her best, but one living in peace with her own flaws. When she shows up at openings, people still whisper her name with respect, but she doesn't need it. She smiles, not because she has to, but because she can. The smile of a woman who has seen heaven, walked through hell, and learned that both live within the same heart. She says little now about love, fame, or loss. When asked about the divorce, she responds with gentleness. It wasn't the end of love, it was the end of a lie. And with that, she stuns everyone once again. Not through flash, but through honesty. At home in Nashville, she lives her life quieter than ever. The mornings are holy, coffee steaming against fogged windows, the sun falling across piano keys. Her kids are growing up. Her career is thriving. But what matters most are the parts in between. The silence that used to scare her now feels like a friend. Some nights, she steps outside barefoot, the grass cool under her feet, the stars endless overhead. She no longer asks what went wrong. She asks instead what was learned. Once she was the girl who knew how to disappear, then she became the woman everyone had to watch. Now she's something rarer, someone who doesn't need to be seen to live. Her story is not a tragedy. It is a coming back to life. A woman who once built her life around others has now built a life around truth. And in that truth, there is no bitterness, just clarity. Because the end of A isn't the end of love. It's the shifting of it, because quiet isn't weakness. It's wisdom, because living when done with grace becomes art. As she said once, gazing straight into the lens, her voice calm and sure, some stories end in sadness. Mine started again with honesty. With that, Nicole Kidman flipped the page, not to run from her past, but to own it. No villains, no heroes, just a woman who finally remembered her own name and said it out loud.